My name is Margaret Hale. I am 63 years old and a retired engineer. That day was my son Daniel's wedding, held at a magnificent estate in Willow Creek. Everything was perfect. The fresh flowers, the orchestra, the laughter. I chose a simple pale blue dress for myself, standing quietly in a corner, watching my son smile beside his new bride, Olivia. When Olivia pulled me closer and introduced me, "This is Daniel's mother," I returned a polite smile. But her father, Mr. Robert Whitman, suddenly froze. His eyes lingered on my face, surprise mixed with confusion. Then he spoke softly, but loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. You're the one who bought my company?" The whole room fell silent. I stood still, feeling every gaze turning toward me. After 15 years of keeping it hidden, my secret had been exposed by a single sentence. If you're still listening, perhaps you, too, have witnessed the secrets that hide behind seemingly perfect family gatherings. Subscribe to the channel and join me in sharing true stories, where we learn that sometimes humility and respect are the most valuable treasures a family can have. I used to live a peaceful life in the suburbs of Richmond, Virginia, in a small house with a garden full of lavender. My husband, Edward Hale, passed away 15 years ago. He was a talented engineer and the one who taught me, stability doesn't come from money, but from how you face life. After he was gone, I lived simply, continuing as a technical consultant for a few small projects before retiring completely. My home always carried the scent of morning coffee and the soft sound of an old radio playing jazz, gentle habits I've never wanted to give up. My son, Daniel, is my most incredible pride and joy. At 32, he works as a marketing manager for a tech company, a kind and hard-working individual. Daniel inherited his father's calm demeanor, though he tends to trust people too easily. When he told me he had met Olivia, a young woman with an MBA and a prestigious family background, I was happy that he had found someone who made him feel fulfilled. I had no idea that this marriage would reopen the door to a past I thought I had sealed shut forever. The wedding was held at Hawthorne Estate, the Whitman family's famous property. Everything was so extravagant it nearly overwhelmed me. The pathway lined with white roses, a 12-piece orchestra, a menu featuring lobster and expensive French wine. Even the air itself seemed choreographed to exude perfection. I chose a simple blue dress, low heels, and my mother's old pearl necklace. It wasn't stubbornness. It was intentional. I didn't want attention. I just wanted to quietly witness my son's happiness. Yet somehow that simplicity made me appear out of place in the eyes of the Whitmans. I realized it the moment I met Patricia, Olivia's mother. Her gaze swept over me from head to toe as if assessing an item that didn't belong in such a refined setting. She smiled, but her tone carried a hint of coldness. "It's lovely that you've kept your natural charm, Margaret. Not many women manage that these days." I simply smiled in return, unbothered. Years of working in a technical field had made me immune to judgmental looks, but that day, amidst all the opulence, I felt an unmistakable line dividing those who belong here and those merely passing through. I didn't know then that this very difference would soon ignite a storm no one could have foreseen. The wedding reception had moved on to the toasts. Everyone was relaxed now, wine glasses constantly being refilled. I chose a seat at a table near the stage where I could watch my son dance his first dance with his wife. Daniel was beaming and Olivia looked like a white rose in her sparkling gown. Watching them, I felt my heart grow light. After all those years as a single mother, all I had ever wished for was to see my son truly happy. As the music slowed, Olivia walked toward me. She took my arm, speaking in a sweet but slightly performative tone. "Dad, Mom, I'd like to introduce you to Daniel's mother, Mrs. Margaret Hale." I smiled politely and nodded in greeting. Robert Whitman, Olivia's father, lifted his glass to make a toast, but his hand froze in midair. His eyes locked onto my face. In an instant, his cheerful expression vanished, replaced by something closer to shock. He set his glass down, his voice suddenly hoarse. You're the one who bought Whitman Technologies 4 years ago, aren't you?" The words dropped like a stone into still water. The table fell silent. The music still played faintly in the background, but in that moment, it felt as though no one was breathing. I clasped my hands tightly under the table, forcing a calm smile. "I believe you must be mistaken," I said slowly, gently, as if it were a matter that had nothing to do with me. But Robert's gaze didn't waver. In his eyes, I could see confusion giving way to recognition. He nodded slightly, almost whispering, "No, I'm not mistaken. I remember that face. You sat at the end of the table during the signing. I always wondered why you chose my company." I pressed my lips together and lowered my head, pretending not to hear. The weight of dozens of eyes on me made me want to leave that place immediately. At the following table, Patricia, Olivia's mother, turned to stare, suspicion flickering in her eyes, and Olivia, the bride of the day, looked from her father to me, completely lost. The atmosphere in the room changed. Laughter faded, instruments faltered. I stood up quietly and said, "Excuse me, I need a moment outside." As I walked through the garden, whispers followed me, blending with the night breeze. Someone murmured, "Is it really her? That can't be true. Wait, that woman's a millionaire?" I took a long breath. After 15 years of living quietly, the moment I had feared had finally arrived. Everything I'd tried to keep hidden was slipping into the light. Through the window, I glanced back at my son, still laughing and chatting with the guests, utterly unaware that from this moment on, our lives would never be peaceful again. I remember it clearly. The year 2008, when Edward, my husband, was still alive. He was a gifted engineer, always tinkering away in the small garage behind our house, surrounded by blueprints, wires, and the faint smell of solder. One day, he rushed into my study, eyes bright with excitement. "Margaret," he said, "I think I've just figured out how to make a phone battery last nearly twice as long without increasing its size." That invention, small as it seemed, completely changed our lives. After 2 years of refinement, Edwards Technology was acquired by a major corporation for $12 million. I still remember the day we signed the contract. He held my hand tightly, smiling as he said, "We can finally rest now." But Edward was never the kind of man who knew how to rest. Instead of spending the money, we began investing. First in clean energy stocks, then in small properties around Richmond. When the market began to rise, we turned toward technology, a field we both understood. Step by step, our assets grew steadily. 10 years later, the number had surpassed $400 million. We never told anyone, never flaunted it. We just kept building quietly, carefully. Then, in 2015, Edward was diagnosed with severe heart disease. He passed away sooner than I could have ever imagined, leaving me and Daniel with a void that nothing could fill. At the funeral, Daniel held my hand and said, "Mom, I'll take care of you from now on." I smiled, but inside, I knew I didn't need him to. All I wanted was for my son to live like an ordinary man, independent, unburdened by wealth or reputation. After Edward's passing, I founded a small investment company called Hale Strategic Group. The name sounded dull, but it was the perfect disguise. Through it, I continued our investments in silence. I became the hidden hand behind several acquisitions, one of which was a struggling firm called Whitman Technologies. When I looked at their financial reports, I saw potential still buried beneath the mistakes. Robert Whitman, the CEO, had simply been too reckless with loans and expansion at the wrong time. I didn't buy his company out of revenge or greed. I did it because I believed it could save hundreds of employees from losing their jobs. I signed the acquisition papers through my attorney, using an alias. No one, not even Daniel, knew. To my son, I was still just his widowed mother, living modestly, proud of her engineer's pension. I chose anonymity not to hide guilt, but to protect what truly mattered. I believe that only when people are not blinded by wealth can they see who they really are. But tonight, as the past resurfaced amid the sound of wedding music, I began to wonder. Perhaps the price of silence had been far too high. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the window, spilling across the familiar kitchen. I made my coffee as usual, trying to act normal, though my mind was tangled in knots. I hadn't slept a minute all night. Robert's question at the wedding kept echoing in my head like a warning bell. The doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Daniel was standing there, looking tired. My son, who had always trusted me without question, now had confusion clouding his eyes. He sat down, his hands clasped tightly together, and spoke plainly. "Mom, last night Olivia's father told me you were the one behind Whitman Technologies. Is that true?" I felt my heart tighten. I wanted to deny it, but what came out instead was a faint, forced smile. "He must be mistaken, sweetheart. I'm just an ordinary engineer. How could I possibly be involved in something like that?" Daniel looked at me, his eyes searching mine as if trying to see through the words. "I know you never brag about anything, but there's something you haven't told me, isn't there?" I looked away, taking a slow sip of coffee to steady myself. I had always believed that silence would protect him, but now that same silence made me appear to be a liar. Daniel sighed and stood up. "I don't understand why you have to hide things, but if there's something, I'd rather hear it from you. I don't want others to know more about my mother than I do." Then he left, the door closing softly behind him, leaving me alone in the stillness of the kitchen. I picked up my phone. A new message appeared from Olivia. "Hi, Mom. I think we should meet privately to talk. There are a few important things about the family's future we need to discuss. Lunch tomorrow at the glass room. My treat." I read the message several times. The way she called me Mom sounded both warm and artificial. A woman like Olivia never invites someone to lunch just for a friendly chat. I sat down, staring at my cooling cup of coffee. Everything I thought had been buried was resurfacing, pulling apart the fragile seams of my own family. Daniel had begun to doubt me, and Olivia, she was already planning her next move. Outside the window, yellow leaves drifted down onto the narrow street. I thought, people are like the seasons. Sometimes we have to shed what's comfortable to see where our roots truly lie. But this time, I could feel it in my bones. Something was about to fall. Not just the leaves, but the peace I'd guarded for 15 years. The Glass Room was a restaurant on the top floor of a downtown Richmond hotel. Bright, elegant, its walls made entirely of glass, overlooking the James River glittering in the sun. When I arrived, Olivia was already there, sitting by the window with a glass of red wine in hand. Perfectly composed, perfectly in control. "I'm glad you came," she said lightly. "I chose this place because it's quiet, ideal for a private conversation." I nodded and sat down across from her. She ordered an expensive bottle of Bordeaux and smiled. "Today's on me, Mom. Our family should really start having more meals like this." I only gave a brief, letting her take the lead. After a few lines of polite small talk, Olivia tilted her head slightly, her eyes sharpening. "I've always admired women who are independent and visionary. My father told me that during his company's acquisition, there was a very discreet female investor. She didn't say much, but every decision she made was firm and confident. If that woman was you, I'd love to learn from you. I studied investment myself, but there's still so much I don't understand." Her tone was smooth, almost casual, but every word was measured. I smiled faintly, lifting my glass of water instead of wine. "These days, anyone can invest, Olivia. The important part is understanding what you're really buying, not just shares, but responsibility." She smiled back, her gaze probing. "I completely agree. Oh, by the way, she reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. On the screen was a blurry old photo from a press conference, a group of people signing a contract, and in the corner, the faint outline of a woman in a blue dress who looked remarkably like me. "I found this online," Olivia said sweetly. "Funny coincidence. The woman in this photo looks so much like you." I glanced at the photo briefly, keeping my smile. How interesting. She really does, doesn't she? Daniel, sitting beside her, finally spoke up for the first time during lunch. "Olivia, why did you look this up?" She placed her phone down gently, smile unwavering. "Just curiosity, darling. I was thinking, if Mom really has experience in deals like that, it would be wonderful for us to learn from her. I believe a family that combines love and financial insight will always be stronger." I understood immediately. Behind those polished words was an invitation, or rather, an attempt at control. I gave a small, calm smile and set my napkin down. If family bonds have to be measured in money, they're no longer family. The air at the table froze for a few seconds. Olivia kept her smile, but I saw the flicker of irritation in her eyes. She quickly changed the subject to the wine, the dishes, the view, but I knew. This lunch hadn't been casual at all. When I left the restaurant, the sunlight outside was blinding. A clear feeling settled in my chest. Olivia didn't just want the truth. She wanted to own it. And from that very moment, I knew the real game had just begun. After that lunch, I returned home with a cold heaviness in my chest. There was no longer any doubt Olivia wasn't merely curious. She was planning something, and I, though unwilling, had no choice but to become who I once was, the woman who always stayed several steps ahead of everyone else. The next morning, I called Jonathan Price, my financial advisor of 10 years. He was the only person, besides me, who knew even a fraction of the truth about my family's real assets. The moment he heard my voice, he said simply, "Who do you want me to investigate?" "I need the Whitman family's financial situation, every detail you can get." 3 days later, we met again in his small office in downtown Richmond. Jonathan placed a thick file in front of me. "The results aren't good," he said, flipping through the pages. "The Whitmans are in bad debt with 3 major banks. Their main asset, the Hawthorne estate, is over 70% mortgaged. They've maintained their reputation by skillfully borrowing to repay old loans. Without new capital, they'll be insolvent within 6 months." I stayed silent, tapping my fingers lightly on the table. He continued, "As for Olivia, she opened 3 new lines of credit this month, totaling over $200,000. And here's what caught my attention. One of the expenses is listed under special legal consulting. I traced it. Seems she's hired a private investigation firm in Washington that specializes in uncovering hidden assets." I closed my eyes for a moment. The pieces started falling into place. Olivia had become suspicious after the wedding and then began gathering evidence to prepare a legal strike, possibly a motion to classify extended marital assets or a claim to financial benefits through Daniel. A smart, calculated, and dangerous move. "Jonathan," I said slowly, "can you ensure my investment structures remain airtight?" He nodded. "They're still secure, but if someone's determined enough, they could trace everything back to Hale Strategic Group. My advice? Prepare a defensive plan." I stood and walked to the window. Below, traffic flowed in a steady rhythm, like time itself moving forward. I had spent 15 years keeping my son's life ordinary and untouched. Now, because of one woman's greed, all of that was in jeopardy. Turning back, my voice was calm but firm. "Jonathan, gather every bit of financial data on the Whitmans, including any asset registered under Olivia's name. I want to know everything before they make their move." He studied me for a moment, then smiled faintly. "What are you planning to do?" "I'm protecting what's mine," I said evenly, "but this time I won't stay silent." When I left his office, the afternoon sunlight washed the street in pale gold. Fear had given way to a sharp, cold clarity. The game had changed, and if Olivia wanted to turn this family into a battlefield, I would make her understand. I've never lost on my own ground. That evening, the doorbell rang. I knew they would come. Daniel and Olivia. My instinct told me this would no longer be a simple family conversation. Olivia entered first, wearing a beige coat, her hair neatly tied back, a thick folder clutched in her arms. Daniel followed, his expression tense. He tried to smile, but unease flickered behind it. "Mom," Daniel began, "Olivia has something she wants to present. I think it's best we all discuss it together." Olivia set the folder on the table, her voice soft but steady. "I've been thinking a lot about how our families could be more connected. I've drafted a proposal. I'm calling it the Hale Whitman Family Trust. The goal is to consolidate our resources to ensure financial stability and create a foundation for future generations." I looked at her calmly. "Sounds nice. And how exactly do you plan to consolidate them?" She opened the folder, flipping through pages filled with neat charts and summaries. "The trust would include assets from both sides, managed jointly. I believe that if we share financial information and plan together, there will be no more misunderstandings between our families." Her tone was gentle, every word measured, the practiced delivery of someone presenting to investors. But in her eyes, I saw something else, fear intertwined with ambition, like someone standing on the edge of a cliff. I waited a moment, then asked, my voice calm but direct, "Olivia, I'll ask you one thing. Do you truly love Daniel?" The air froze instantly. Daniel turned to look at her, his face growing pale. Olivia hesitated. Her hand trembled slightly as she lifted her glass of water. "Of course I love him," she said, her voice catching. "It's just, I have to think about the future, too. My parents are struggling, and I can't stand by and watch them lose everything." I stayed silent for a moment, then opened a drawer and took out another folder, placing it in front of her. "If all you wanted was to help your parents, why did you hire a private investigation firm in Washington? Why open 3 new credit lines to pay for special legal consulting? And why is that law firm known for handling marital asset litigation?" Olivia stared at the folder, her confidence crumbling. Daniel turned to her, his voice breaking. "Olivia, did you really do this?" She didn't answer. Tears welled up as she lowered her head. "I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I was afraid that one day you'd leave, and all that money would vanish, and we'd be left with nothing. I only wanted to protect this family." I looked at her, and for the first time I saw the fear beneath her proud exterior. But I also knew that fear had driven her too far. "Olivia," I said softly but firmly, "a family isn't built on contracts and control. It's built on trust, and that's what you've lost." Daniel sat motionless. I saw in his eyes not anger, but deep disappointment, the kind that wounds more than rage ever could. As for Olivia, her tears fell silently, but I could tell they weren't just from guilt. They were from the realization that the game she had so carefully constructed had just collapsed in her hands. The night after the confrontation, the house was silent. When I walked to the living room, Olivia was gone, leaving the folder for the family trust open on the table. Daniel sat alone on the sofa, his head in his hands. The warm light of the lamp revealed the exhaustion etched across his face. "Mom," he said, voice low, "why did you have to do this? Why couldn't you just let us handle it ourselves?" I answered softly, "Because I knew you'd be drawn into a game you don't understand, and I couldn't just stand by and watch." Daniel stood abruptly, his eyes wounded. "But you've destroyed my marriage. I can take a lot of things, but not you turning the woman I love into a villain." His words cut deep, like a blade I hadn't expected. I stayed silent, listening only to the ticking of the clock. After all these years of secrecy, this was the cost. To be doubted by my own son when all I'd ever done was protect him. A few days later, a letter arrived from Olivia's attorney. She had filed for a temporary separation, citing irreconcilable differences in finances and trust. But the most striking part came at the end of the document. Mrs. Margaret Hale must disclose the origins of her assets, as these directly impact the shared financial interests of Daniel Hale and Olivia Whitman. I read each word carefully, my expression calm but cold. Olivia didn't just want to leave the marriage. She wanted to leave with my fortune. I called for an emergency meeting with Jonathan Price and my lawyer, Sarah Collins. When I finished explaining, Sarah looked straight at me. "If you want to put out this fire," she said, "you need to cut off its oxygen supply. Do you want to countersue?" I shook my head. No, I want it over, fast, clean, and final. 3 days later, we met in the conference room of Collins and Price Law. Across the table sat Olivia and her attorney. She was impeccably dressed, her face expressionless, the vulnerability from before completely gone. Her lawyer began, "My client believes that Mrs. Hale's assets form the financial foundation of the family. Therefore, she has a right to a fair share in the event of marital dissolution." I calmly placed a folder on the table and slid it toward them. Inside is full financial documentation showing that Whitman Holdings, your father's company, is drowning in debt. There's also a detailed report of the credit lines you've recently opened. Olivia's face paled slightly. I continued, "I don't want to drag this out. I'll offer you $4 million. One payment, once only. In return, you'll withdraw all claims and sign a binding agreement to leave my son's life completely. No contact, no demands." The room fell dead silent. Olivia's lawyer looked at her, uncertain. I met Olivia's eyes, the same woman who once called me Mom. "This isn't money," I said quietly. "This is closure." Her fists clenched. Tears welled up, but she refused to let them fall. She rose from her seat, whispering, "You've won." Then she walked out without looking back. When the door closed, I exhaled slowly. No victory felt light, only emptiness, and the quiet ache of a mother who had protected her son, yet lost a piece of her heart in doing so. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Jonathan. His tone was calm. They agreed. Olivia and her attorney accepted the $4 million settlement. They'll sign the withdrawal papers this afternoon. I sat still, a strange mix of relief and hollowness settling over me. The battle was over, but there was no joy in it. Outside, rain tapped against the window, each drop marking time for an ending that had already been written. That evening, Daniel came home. His face was gaunt, his eyes red from sleepless nights. He stood in the living room holding a paper filled with numbers. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking, "did you really do this? You paid her to leave?" I nodded. "Yes." "You're buying my happiness?" I met his eyes steadily. "No, Daniel, I'm helping you see who truly loved you. If someone can walk away for money, that isn't love. I didn't buy back your happiness. I saved you from losing it forever." Daniel gripped the paper tightly, saying nothing. I could see the struggle in his eyes between heart and reason. He still loved her, still wanted to believe she'd simply lost her way, but the truth was too clear to deny. I said nothing more. Some lessons can only be learned through heartbreak. That night, the house was quiet again. Daniel stayed in his study, and I sat in the living room gazing at Edward's old photograph. The picture, yellowed with age, was taken in 1989 when we were young and had just completed our first project together. Edward stood beside me, his eyes kind, his smile steady. I placed my hand gently on the glass and whispered, "Did I do the right thing, Edward? I only wanted to protect our son. But why does my heart still feel so heavy?" In my mind, I could almost hear his voice, not in sound but in memory, the echo of his calm, steady wisdom. Money only matters when it protects the ones you love, but if it hurts them, it becomes a burden. I closed my eyes and let that thought repeat in my head, a quiet, late comfort. The next morning, Daniel came out with sunken eyes, but something in his expression had changed. He placed an envelope in front of me. Inside was the signed divorce agreement. "You were right, Mom," he said softly. "If love can be bought with money, it was never real." I didn't reply. I simply stood and embraced him. Outside, the rain had stopped. The first light of dawn filtered through the window, falling on Edward's photograph, where his gentle smile remained as steadfast as ever. A year passed. Time doesn't erase all wounds, but it softens them. I left Richmond, sold the house that had held both joy and sorrow, and moved to Santa Fe, a small city surrounded by red mountains glowing under the sun. Here, I found a different rhythm of life, slower, gentler, free from whispers and judgmental stares. I bought a small house near the art market and founded a charity called the Edward Foundation, named after my husband. Its purpose was simple: to support underprivileged engineering students, helping them complete the research projects they believed in. I wanted to continue what Edward had once dreamed of, bringing knowledge back to those who needed it most. On the foundation's first scholarship day, a young student held my hand, eyes brimming with tears. "If it weren't for you," he said, "I would have had to quit school and work full-time." His words warmed my heart. In that moment, I understood what actual value money holds, when it uplifts, not divides. As for Daniel, my son, he had changed too. After a long period of solitude, he met Sophie, a gentle, humble elementary school teacher. Sophie knew nothing about the family's complicated history. To her, I was simply a widowed mother living a quiet life in Santa Fe. When we first met, she took my hand and said, "You have the same eyes as Daniel, the eyes of someone who knows how to listen." I smiled. After so many years, I finally saw my son being loved for who he was, not for his wealth or status. My relationship with Daniel also slowly began to heal. We began talking more, and the awkward silences disappeared. One day, he hugged me and said, "You were right, Mom. I understand now. Sometimes real love has to go through pain before we can truly see it." One early autumn afternoon, while organizing documents at the foundation office, the mail carrier handed me an unmarked envelope. Inside was a short letter written in a delicate, familiar hand. "Mrs. Margaret, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted to take a moment to express my gratitude. Thank you for helping me realize the most valuable thing I ever had. Not money, but trust and the love of a truly good person. I hope that one day, when I am brave enough, I can live by what you once taught Daniel. Be grateful instead of demanding. Olivia." I read the letter over and over, then folded it carefully. Not to forgive the past, but to close it, peacefully. That afternoon, I walked to the market. The wind carried the smell of fresh pastries and the faint sound of street music. Life was simple, just like me now. No more hiding, no more proving anything to anyone. I realized forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about accepting that we all make mistakes, and that everyone deserves a chance to begin again. Life sometimes forces us to walk through loss to find ourselves again. After everything, I've come to understand that humility isn't weakness. It's the strength of those who know when to stay silent and how to stand firm amid the storm. I've also learned that true wealth isn't measured by a bank account, but by the way we preserve dignity and family bonds. A person can lose money, but as long as they hold compassion, they are never inferior. When I see Daniel and Sophie laughing together in their small home in Santa Fe, I see a reflection of Edward and me years ago. Perhaps happiness is simply this: knowing how to cherish what we have, to love while we still can, and to respect those who came before us. That is how a family keeps its foundation strong. And about forgiveness, I've learned it cannot change the past, but it can redeem the future. To forgive doesn't mean erasing the pain. It means refusing to let it dictate the rest of our lives. I end this story not with sadness, but with gratitude. Gratitude for the hard years that made me strong. Gratitude even for those who once hurt me, because through them, I learned the true worth of peace. If you're still listening, perhaps you, too, have known a mother who silently sacrificed everything for her family. Share your story in the comments below. Maybe it will help someone realize the power of gratitude and compassion. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so we can continue spreading stories of family, where every lesson is a small light that warms the heart and reminds us that love has never gone out of style.